Hey everyone, this is Nader Corey. I'm trying to smile more, so I noticed last week I had a little bit of a straight face at the beginning, so here's a big smile for you. Yeah, thanks for joining us. This is Biz Talk, APA's online series discussing business topics relevant to the photo community. I'm joined by Juliette Wolf-Robin, APA Executive Director. She'll be fielding questions. Please add questions in the Q&A area. Juliette, did you want to say a couple announcements?
Yeah, just basically that a lot of the information we're getting, we are compiling so that we're working on a resource guide, that we are also working with other associations on a guide so that we can, from the things we're hearing, we can provide that information for the community and that they can as well. And so that there's a consistent story and theme. So we're going to be working on that. And the same with waivers, documents. We're looking at how we can provide information on our website that photographers in the community can use. So those are things that are happening. So questions that we hear from you today, or we have, or we will, are all things that we are looking at. We are on this every day, talking to so many people, trying to gather what's going to help the community. So,
yeah, nice. With that said, today we're continuing the conversation of what work's going to look like in the future. So we're going to be talking about liability waivers and how contracts may change, as well as going to hear some stories of shoots being discussed, estimated. I just wanted to note that a lot of what we're going to be talking about is opinion, and there's no set guidelines yet on things, and we're just researching safety, and none of us are experts, but we're doing our best to work with what we got. And so let me introduce our panelists. First, we have Stephen Doniger. Stephen is a partner with the law firm Doniger Burroughs. Doniger Burroughs is California's premier fashion, art, entertainment, and technology law firm. The firm has resolved more than 1,000 disputes over the almost 20 years it's been in existence, and has represented all manner of individuals and businesses in the creative industries. Stephen is one of the preeminent copyright attorneys in the United States and is actively involved in the Instagram embedding issue. Hi, Stephen. Say hi.
Hi, thank you for having me today. It's a pleasure to be here.
Sure. And we also have Susanne Lancaster. Susanne is a producer based out of, sorry, is it Dallas or Austin?
I'm in Dallas.
Dallas, Texas. Susanne started her career in advertising and production as an agency art producer in 1998. After years of being on the client side, she realized her passion was working with photographers behind the camera and making productions come to life. She went out on her own in 2007 and never looked back. Thanks for joining us, Susanne.
Thank you for having me.
Sure. And then we have Freda Scott. Freda Scott actually is my agent, and Freda Scott represents a select group of still and motion photographers, illustrators, retouchers, and copywriters worldwide. Freda began her career as a stylist in San Francisco, working for Macy's agency Hal Riney and many other clients, including the very first Apple computer campaign. Good little bit of history there. So thanks for joining us, Freda. Nice to see you. We've been talking on the phone a lot, not seeing your face. It's nice to see you. Well, great. So I thought we'd start off with you, Stephen. And right now, photographers really want to start planning ahead to protect themselves. Of course, all of us, right? Everyone that's on the crew, producers, stylists, everyone, we want to make sure is safe. And today we're kind of looking a little bit more in the direction of paperwork, right? What can photographers be doing differently in terms of what we're sending out there to, or the communications we're having with clients, and making sure that litigation doesn't happen or minimize it at least. So we can first start with in terms of contracts. I know I did get to chat with you, and you mentioned, when we're working on contracts, you mentioned addendums. Now, can you elaborate on that a little more? And does that necessarily just mean we're adding a line to our terms and conditions? Is there anything else that, just more on a practical note, that photographers can be doing?
Sure. So when we talk about addendums, it could be a line or a paragraph in the agreement, or it could be an entirely separate rider, like a separate sheet of paper. And it just really depends on how much you need to put in there and how detailed it is. And I want to make sure that people understand the reason for a rider or an addendum to the contract. And so if you'll indulge me, there's this very first, preliminary question of, whether and to what extent someone who's infected with COVID-19 can sue either the person they got it from or the person who put together a job or a project where they got it, and what's the nature of that liability. Because I think it's understanding that then makes sense of why you want to have a rider and and how you can seek to protect yourself. So to just sort of jump into it, what I want to first explain is that your claim, or the claim of someone who gets infected, would most likely be a negligence claim. I mean, there's other claims conceivably, but it's usually a negligence claim you're looking at. And my firm is, as you mentioned, we do a large amount of litigation. We've actually settled coming up on 3,000 claims.
Wow.
But we also serve as general counsel for a lot of our clients, and we do contracts for them and try to minimize their liability. And so it's something that we've got a bit of experience doing. And when you talk about negligence, I mean, this is unlike copyright. The copyright work we do is federal law. So in theory, it's supposed to be uniform across the country, although anyone who gets involved in copyright law knows that's not necessarily the case. Negligence is state law, and negligence claims are going to vary from state to state to a larger degree, although the basic elements of a claim for negligence are that the defendant owed the plaintiff a duty of care. The defendant basically didn't honor that duty, was remiss in following through on that duty, that it caused some harm, and that there's resulting damages, which usually have to be reasonably foreseeable. So in looking at what you want to protect yourself from, the first question is, well, is there a duty to prevent the spread of a disease? If you know that you have a disease, or you know that someone coming into your working environment has a disease or has COVID-19, is there a duty to prevent other people from being in contact with those people? And there are no cases, there's nothing out there specific to COVID-19, but there is a fairly long body of case law dealing with other diseases and illnesses saying that in fact there is that duty. There's a great 1937 case out of Pennsylvania in which the court said, and I think this just sort of puts it in the simplest terms, to be stricken with disease through another's negligence is no different from being struck with an automobile through another's negligence. Right? So the question is, if someone gets COVID-19 from you or on a job set, is that a result of your negligence? And so really then the question when you dig into the case law is, did you have actual or constructive knowledge or notice that that was a reasonable possibility? And so that's essentially, I mean, I could speak a lot more about this, but that's in a nutshell what you want to protect yourself against is, a claim that you failed to take reasonable steps to keep people safe. Obviously, the safest thing to do is just to not move forward, but it doesn't mean that you're going to be subject to a claim for negligence if you do. And so when we talk about waivers and riders and assumption, there's a couple of things to keep in mind. Okay, the first of those is, all of us who've done anything, gone to an amusement park, or, for those of us that have done things a bit more, crazy like skydiving, or even going skiing, there are always provisions on those on your tickets or on the agreements that include assumption of the risk. We've all seen that language, assumption of the risk. There's certain things that you do in which there is an inherent risk, especially in the age of pandemic, and to be completely clear in your agreement that you are, if you come to this, understand that there is an assumption of the risk that you may be undertaking. The other thing that I would highly, highly recommend is that anyone who moves forward with a shoot or an event or like whatever it is that they're doing, have every person who attends and who signs off on whatever contract or agreement or terms there are, represent and warrant that, to the best of their knowledge, neither they nor anyone else they know are going to be there has COVID-19, it has the virus, is sick. Because what you're doing now is you're saying, okay, we put together this event knowing that there was the illness out there, but we did everything reasonably possible to make sure that no one at the event had the illness, and that everyone understood, that there's this thing out there that we don't have, complete control over, and then beyond. And so that's from a contract perspective, I think that's really, what there is to do. And we can certainly talk a bit more about that, and I'm happy to answer any questions. The thing to keep in mind, of course, is that even waivers and assumptions of risk forms are not absolute protectors. If I go skydiving and the instructor that I'm with, acts grossly negligently, or worse, decides he's mad at me on the plane and cuts me loose from the parachute, he's not going to be immune from liability merely because I signed an assumption of the risk, because there was actions taken that exceeded the normal risk that I would have assumed. So you always have to make sure in the process of doing whatever it is that you're asking someone to assume the risk in, that you're acting responsibly. That may be keeping people 6 feet apart unless absolutely necessary. It may be just watching out for any signs of illness and asking anyone to leave who, especially if it's over a longer period of time, who starts to develop any sort of symptoms that may be concerning. That's sort of like the general overview.
Mm-hmm. Gosh, yeah, a lot of questions came to me as you were speaking, but first off, back to the whole contract. The contract is essentially your communication with the client, right? And so what are you actually going to be telling the client in regarding COVID and what is, and we've heard, indemnification referenced, like what kind of wording are you going to be like adding in there with the client?
So the wording is going to be specific to whatever the project is. It has to be. The risks that you assume when you undertake any particular activity have to are always specific to what that activity is. The other day I got online after you asked me about this, and I just went to find a form online. Obviously, we've done similar things for our clients, and I think I mentioned this to you before. I found a waiver form that the Boys and Girls Club had put forward, and I can read you the language from that. It says at the very top, it just says assumption of the risk and waiver of liability relating to coronavirus/COVID-19, and it says, the novel coronavirus, COVID-19, has been declared a worldwide pandemic by the World Health Organization. COVID-19 is extremely contagious and is believed to spread mainly from person-to-person contact. As a result, federal, state, and local governments and federal and state health agencies recommend social distancing and have, in many locations, prohibited the congregation of groups of people. Boys and Girls Club of San Francisco has put in place preventative measures to reduce the spread of COVID-19. However, the club cannot guarantee that you or your children will not become infected with COVID-19. Further, attending the club could increase your risk and your children's risk of contracting COVID-19. By signing this agreement, I acknowledge and then there's a line, and then underneath that is the part that someone would sign. So this is the representation of the signer. By signing this agreement, I acknowledge the contagious nature of COVID-19 and voluntarily assume the risk that my children and I may be exposed to or infected by COVID-19 by attending the club, and that such exposure or infection may result in becoming exposed to or infected by COVID-19 at the club, which may result in injury, illness, permanent disability, and death. I understand that these risks may result from the actions, omissions, or negligence of myself and others, including but not limited to the club employees, volunteers, and program participants and their families. Now remember, I said a moment ago that that's not foolproof language. If in fact the club is negligent or does anything improper, you may be able to pierce that.
Right.
It then just goes on to say, I voluntarily agree to assume all the foregoing risks and accept sole responsibility for any injury to my children or myself, etc. And then it just goes down, and I release and covenant not to sue and like there's just a bunch of additional language in there. So something of that nature.
So is there anything in there you think is not well written, or is that basically people could just switch a few words in there and go to town? Of course, and I was talking to Susanne as well, and I think she's working with the same thing where she's heard of people looking at documents and then tweaking it and then having a lawyer look at it, basically. With that said, Juliet is saying we're gonna, as APA, going to put something together we're gonna make available. But so yeah, is there anything else you would add to that, or from the Boys and Girls Club waiver?
I mean, you're asking me a question that's hard to answer without knowing the specifics of what is, of what risks are being assumed and what's involved in the project. I mean, they have to be specific.
Okay.
The general language of this is, it is fairly, reasonable language. I'm always hesitant to to state, particularly on a webinar where I'm trying to give good advice, that someone can just take something they find on the internet and use it.
Mm-hmm.
But this is the sort of thing adapted to a particular situation that we would recommend for a waiver.
Right. Okay.
And there was a question a photographer asked, because they were going to do a shoot this week with just having their assistant and the client, and they're in New York, and then the client lawyers said not to do it. Is there anything that they could have done to have something signed that you think would have allowed that to happen, or once the client shuts you down, that's it? I don't know.
Yeah, it's hard to answer that question. I mean, you look at what's going on in government, where you've got some people saying it's time to reopen and some people saying no, absolutely not. And that same sort of difference of opinion, is going to pervade the workplace. And if you've got attorneys who are firmly of the view that it's too early and this is too much of a risk and there's social distancing and work closure should continue, I don't know how you tell them that's not the case. This whole discussion presumes that that all the parties are ready to move forward and you're just looking at how to minimize your liability.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry if that's a non-answer, but that's kind of the best that I can do.
Let's see here. So sorry, I mean, in terms of the contract though, I'm not sure. I feel like, the communication with the client, because there could end up being like, no, this is your fault, or that you're a little bit back and forth. Like, what kind of wording can you say on those, on the terms and conditions to the client to protect yourself?
I think one of the words we were talking about earlier was indemnification.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So indemnification is a legal concept that has one party agree to assume responsibility for anything that happens. A lot of the work that we do is in the fashion apparel industry, in addition to representing photographers. And whenever someone sells product to a major retail store, Macy's, Nordstrom, Target, Saks, etc., the retail store, their terms and service in their purchase agreements, their terms all provide that anyone that sells them product is going to assume responsibility for the product they sell. So that if there's, a trademark issue, if there's a copyright issue, if the goods don't comply with government regulations, maybe they spontaneously catch on fire, that God forbid, that the vendor who sells the product to the store is going to assume all legal responsibility, is going to pay for the attorneys to defend the store if they get sued, is going to take care of any damages that are assessed against the store. That's an indemnification agreement. When you get into contracts between photographers on the one hand and their clients on the other, there's always going to be a question of who should be responsible for what. I'm a photographer. I'm going to shoot what you want me to shoot and use my skills to do that. I'm going to do it where you want me to do it. You're setting it up. You've got to be responsible for any accidents or injuries that happen. On the other hand, it could be that a client goes to a photographer and says, okay, this is my concept. I want you to put the whole thing together and do it, and you have to do it in a way that's appropriate. And you're gonna, if we end up getting sued, you're gonna indemnify us and hold us harmless. That's always a question of negotiation between the parties. That's so just so everyone understands what indemnification is. Like that's it. Beyond that, is there a question that I can answer beyond that?
Well, actually, there was somebody who was asking the question, how can we deal with publishers' magazine contracts, which always try to put the liability on photographers? Sometimes, you have to try to negotiate with these clients, and you kind of feel a little stuck, how do you kind of negotiate when they send over this thing trying to hold you liable and for anything, and how do you respond to that? I'm sure, it's good to have a specific case, but I guess a general, maybe just some advice, I guess.
Yeah, at our firm, so much of what we do is representing artists and particularly representing photographers. And, there's a lot of amazing photographers out there who, I think everyone knows that all the staff photography jobs at newspapers and magazines have pretty much dried up because everyone's out there with a camera taking their shots, and it's become, if you're not willing to do it on my terms, then there's 10 other people behind you that are. Really, photographers need to, as a collective group, say this is not agreeable, because it's really hard to have any sort of bargaining position if there's 10 people behind you, willing to jump on the job on the terms that are that the magazine is insisting on. Again, we deal in the law, we deal in infringement issues, we deal in trying to limit liability. It's almost a collective bargaining type of question you're asking, and it's tough. It's a tough market until unless and until you get to that high level where they have to have the big name photographer, and then you've got a bit more sway.
Right.
It's an unfortunate situation. A lot of our clients, we try to do the best we can for them. But at some point it's like you either, these are the terms offered. Are you going to?
Yeah. If photographers wanted to reach out for help on, I think you put your, if they wanted to reach out for help on that, is that something that you can actually help them with? Is that something that you have time for?
Yeah, as I mentioned, we have a lot of clients for whom we serve as general counsel, and we do this sort of work. And we tend to be one of the more reasonably priced firms out there, and we do a lot of stuff on a contingency where people are infringed on. That said, we're not pro bono, and for a lot of photographers that don't really have the money to pay an attorney to jump in there and negotiate better terms for them, they're in a difficult situation.
Right. So in terms of, and I don't know if you can really speak to this, we were going to have APA insurance on, but unfortunately weren't able to have them on today. Some people were asking about if crew talent would be eligible for workers' comp. That's not something you can really answer, right? That's not your, in terms of those questions, we'll have to get back to you on that. Juliet, I'm sure people maybe if they, yeah, you may have to ask your insurance provider, but also contact us if you need help. Okay, well, how about we kind of move on to Susanne to kind of put it into practical, real-time circumstances here. So Susanne, so thanks for joining us. Besides you being an awesome producer, I also, wanted to have you on because you are in Texas, which is a, what's the term they're using? Partially open state.
Yes.
And so I kind of wanted to first get your perspective on the reality on the ground there, and then maybe if you can go into just what you're up to, and it'd be great to.
Sure. Hello, everyone. So yeah, Texas has partially opened as of May 1st. They were allowed 25% capacity to reopen for malls, movie theaters, and restaurants. Personally, I think it's too soon. That's just my opinion, just because there are indeed so many unknowns. But with that said, shifting to productions and photo shoots and video projects here, obviously I've had shoots that were scheduled in New York and Los Angeles and San Francisco actually within the last couple of months, which have obviously been postponed, canceled, etc. But now that Texas has reopened, productions I wouldn't say are heavily happening. I have heard of a few shoots that are definitely taking place, maybe 3 or 4, maybe it's a small product photo shoot, things of that nature, which are more easy to handle moving forward. I have, though, I was telling you yesterday, Natter, that I have about 5 estimates that have come across my table lately, and they've been from New York, Chicago, California, wanting to possibly shoot in Texas. So with that said, I have been doing a lot of estimates. People and their clients are coming to me and saying, what are you doing? How are you moving forward? What are the general safe practices that you're going to instill, and all those sorts of things. Obviously, this is new to everyone. We're all learning. Things are changing on the daily, as we all know. So back to what Stephen was saying, first and foremost, changing, lines on your terms for your estimates. There are things listed on AICP and so many other websites. And again, I am happy to send those links to Juliet too for references afterwards. And then it's, vetting your crew and what are we doing? And we were talking yesterday about, I have my Susanne sanitation stations ready to go, where I'm fully loaded with, the thermometers and taking people's temperatures and providing the gloves and the masks and, posting signage and stage, if we were to move forward with smaller shoots, what are we going to do? And so again, based on what Stephen says and what everyone's saying, first and foremost is making sure that we can do this safely. If somebody were to come and ask me to do an estimate for 30 plus or even 20 plus crew, I think it's too soon. I think there are still too many unknowns. I think there's still the testing issues. Everyone's saying testing. And, it's hard to make sure that everyone is tested. Again, I would have everybody sign legal waivers and asking people, we're not going to drag them by any assistant. We're not going to drag them to set and say, you have to work. So if we can manage it safely in a smaller group of say 10 or less, including talent and vetting talent and all, and we can talk about that in a minute, I think most people would like to move forward. It's going to be baby steps in order to do so. And there are going to be learning curves along the way, and people are ready and willing. But I think we still need to get a lot more information. Again, basic, like clients, what our clients are looking to producers and production companies to tell them how to move forward. And there still are those large clouds of ambiguity from a legal perspective, a safety perspective, all of the above. So I think everyone, again, this is why we're having all these Zoom conferences, is trying to figure out how to do this properly and safely. So I would say that we'll probably start having photo shoots within 2 weeks. I honestly feel that that is probably what's going to happen, large or small for me. I know I'm going to stick to the smaller side, but that's kind of where we are right now. We're sort of at a standstill. People want to move forward, but you can feel the hesitation. So yeah, I think it's still too soon personally, but everyone wants to work. Everyone wants to work. So
yeah, and just as a side note, I just want to make sure people know that, like, bringing Susanne on, I'm not trying to promote, going back to work, or
oh gosh, no.
I'm saying, like, I think it's because Texas is a little bit different, that and right now we're trying to do the best we can to foresee the future, but yeah, just as a little side note, but tell us just a little bit about some of these jobs and the kinds of questions you're having and the kinds of challenges you're having, and what feels reasonable, and kind of trying to put yourself into that each situation, and like visualize, like, what are the kinds of things that could be happening. And I mean, I know that you
how
made
to
that
move forward.
Yeah, like you mentioned the toilets, stuff.
The toilets, so you have, like Stephen said, what's, overreacting, where's that sort of fine line? So I had some people saying, if we're shooting in a studio and there's only one restroom, then we need to rent a honey wagon and have, toilet monitors and people wiping, down the toilets and cleaning them after each person. To me, I think at this point, if you are needing that many toilets, from my opinion, if you are needing that many toilets and there are so many unknowns, I personally don't think that those types of productions should be happening right now. That's just for me. For instance, I had a conversation late yesterday with a client in New York, and what used to be done, people are talking about timing. So what used to be packed into a 10-hour day might now have to be 2 days. We are going to need to have, especially if remote shooting is involved, you're going to have that additional time for approvals on wardrobe, hair and makeup. People want to see these things. Limiting exposure. Maybe your 10-hour shoot day is now a 5-hour shoot day, just to limit those, just the scenario itself. Allowing, say, a 45-minute check-in and scrub-in time, where people come in and they have their temperatures taken, they sign all of these waivers, they get the lay of the land, we have the safety meeting. So you have to allocate time to make sure that you are doing diligence and that you are communicating your expectations and making sure that people feel like they are indeed taken care of. And also people were talking about working into the schedules, shot one down to the time, and adding literally in the schedule, everyone takes a break, hand washing, glove change, that type of thing. Because I think what I've heard also, people get into the routine and they start with their masks, and then by lunch it's wheels off, everyone feels comfortable, and then by the end of the day, what's the point? You know what I'm saying? So there has to be a safety, possibly people are mentioning having a safety and health monitor on set. Somebody who is strictly there to say, you need to wash your hands, your gloves are off, that type of thing. Which then also turns around to, and I'm probably just going off on little rabbit holes, forgive me everybody. But from a budget standpoint too, clients, I think, are thinking that with remote shooting that there might be cost savings, where that actually might not be true. As a lot of estimates now, you're going to be seeing line items that cover off on PPE, which is the personal protection equipment, the gloves, the masks, because sometimes those are really difficult to find. So you're spending lots of money outsourcing and getting all of these materials. So that's something that will go up, whether it's $350, $750. I know people are trying to find a normal so that there isn't price gouging. So whether it's $350, $750, whatever that might be, if I find out, I'll let everybody know. But forgive me, I'm going off on. There's so many things that just.
Well, and I mean, the thing is, and you used the word guinea pig, like,
yeah,
people who are starting out, right now are kind of a little bit of the guinea pigs, and
right.
whether that's, I mean, you have to start somewhere, I guess.
You have to start somewhere.
And of course, there's a question: when do you start?
Right.
Right. But are you, in terms of a safety monitor, whatever the term we want to use for it, like if you're going to have a shoot in a couple of weeks,
right?
How do you go about deciding or finding someone like that? Is it, is a PA to someone who's a production assistant, is that someone who's not qualified enough? Do you need to go find someone who's a medic?
Right.
Like,
yes.
You started
and I can send a link. There is a company that I use on all of my shoots, whether we have people in the water or whether we're having campfires, things of that nature. There is a medic website, and they supply medics, and they'll tailor it to whether it's construction site or photo shoot, and they have them countrywide based on city to where they have these people who are qualified that can show up to set with their kit, this, that, and the other. So that would probably, you want someone who has some sort of accreditation, whether it's CPR, what have you. You want somebody who has some sort of experience with that. And so that would be my first step when hiring a health and safety monitor, is to reach out to, and I can send Juliet, again, the links to these people, so that you guys can contact them and then vet those people as well. Find out, are they they might be a lifeguard, but do they have, what other additional training are they having due to the current climate?
Yeah. It's Samantha Isom is listening to this call. She was on the call last week, and she's doing some great things. And because they're going to be doing a training as far as I heard, mid-May. And the question is how much do we wait until that training?
Right.
And how much can we? Obviously, we have to start. In your case, starting to prepare. But she just mentioned, just a heads up, taking one's temperature does not exclude one from having COVID or being able to transmit the disease. Standard protocols of infection control need to be put in place to be more safe. Not that it's eliminating risk, but minimizing risk. And I mean, yeah, I have heard some of these things about that when you take the temperature, that's like on the skin, it may not necessarily be conclusive enough to but it sounds like there are layers of measures that you can take to do as best you can to limit your liability, right? I mean,
right.
And every shoot's going to be a different set of circumstances.
Exactly.
And unfortunately, we don't have a ton of time to go into like smaller shoots, how you deal with that. But
right.
So most of your, this shoot you're bidding on for mid-May, what's the size of the crew on that?
I'm trying to limit it to 10, to 10 crew members. And again, really quickly, just, if you want to go back to talent, because everyone's concern is if you have intimate photographs of talent, more than 2 people, or maybe it's a couple in a park, where there are those interactions, how do you move forward with that? So I have talked to many talent agencies, and a lot of husband and wife model couples, are they quarantining together, vetting it from that perspective. Families, you might not be piecemealing families these days. You might be finding, a beautiful mom and a dad and their beautiful family and using it that way from that perspective. And just talking to the talent agencies and finding out who has really just been trying to be safe, and that too that is taking more time as well.
Right.
But I think the talent is a key issue here.
Yeah.
You know, especially depending on what you're shooting. But the shoot that I have, we would have about 3 talent. One would be a couple, and then another would just be a single person. It would be a small studio setting. And we're just trying to limit it and stagger it. Normally you have, one talent's in the chair while the other one's on set, which brings up the hair and makeup. You just want to make sure that they have time to sanitize all of their equipment as well, whether it's turning into disposables or having talent show up with their own lip and eye makeup and they're doing the powdering, things of that nature. So about 10 to 12 people is my limit at this point.
Got it.
Where I'd like to keep it with a very limited number of talent and making sure that we can stagger the schedules appropriately. You just have to be safe no matter what anyone says, first and foremost.
Well, thank you for all the good work you're doing, and I know you're doing your best, and really appreciate all the support or the advice here. So Freda, can you give us a sense for, there was a shoot that you were mentioning to me from one of your photographers. Can you give us a little sense of some of the details of that and
yeah, sure.
Well?
So far, all of my photographers are creating in place. Nobody's been asked yet to do a shoot with a crew and outside talent, much like what Suzanne's having to deal with. So I've got several estimates out for this situation, and one's going to happen next week in New York City. And I wasn't exactly surprised, but after our estimate got approved, the business affairs department of that, it's a conglomerate agency, asked if we would add an addendum to our estimate saying that the person that is assisting the photographer has been in isolation with him since the lockdown. And they gave me some of the language and I put that into the estimate and that was approved. I would expect that this is going to happen with the bigger agencies more and more.
Yeah, they're going to be coming at us in different ways. And so, sorry, you to be clear, that wasn't even, that was a shelter in place type of shoot, right?
Right.
This wasn't even...
And all of the ones I've done estimates for in the last few weeks have been shelter in place. I haven't had anyone wanting to go out on location or asking for outside talent yet.
Mm-hmm. What were some of the things that client was concerns? Like, why would they even be concerned? You know, I mean, it's
it's a huge agency. It's one of the 5, that are, excuse me, that are the biggest. And I'm sure lawyers got a hold of it and just said, you need to make sure that whoever is on the set with the photographer has been vetted. So I had to put that in writing. And, I think it's just to cover themselves.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Give us a little, I mean, without explaining, getting into too detailed, but a little bit of what the shoot was. And I think you mentioned that, was it stylists were going to be dropping off?
It's next week it's going to be happening. There will be some fabrics that will be delivered. They're going to be delivered 3 days, 72 hours ahead of the shoot. Mm-hmm. They had to be shopped for online, and they had a production meeting on Zoom last week to make sure everybody understood what is going to happen with the fabrics. And there's going to be a drawing for a background, an illustration. It's a still life shoot. So it really is the ideal thing for a photographer to do in place. And this photographer's fiance is also his assistant. She can help out, and she can also be the hand model. So it's the perfect situation.
Tell us just overall what you're seeing, because we know you do a lot of outreach to clients, and you're always staying, keeping your relationships with them. Just overall, I mean, of course, 3 weeks ago is different than today, but are you noticing clients starting to have a little bit more trust and kind of feeling like that they can start to get back to normal or
Well, people have
not
been
normal,
talking much more in the last 2 weeks, I would say, much more about what I've gotten a lot more communication of what they're looking for and asking what's possible. I've done a few estimates, and I think they're being very specific about where they want to shoot, because you know they either want to be close to their client or close to where they are. Although everything will be done remotely, we'll have Zoom set up on the sets to include the producer and the creatives and the client. It's just, I think their comfortability with being able to get everyone together in an easy place.
Mm-hmm. Stephen, now that you've heard some of what is happening out there, is there, like, are you kind of surprised, or I'm sure maybe you're in contact with a lot of other photographers, but is there any kind of things you want to add to this that, in terms of how do you feel about all this?
So there's always an inherent uncertainty in asking the question of what a reasonable person would do. And like, as we discussed before, when you asked me what else to put into any written addendums or contracts, it, to some degree depends on the shoot, like what reasonable precautions would be. I think my thoughts on this after hearing what what the other panelists have said, and I think that there's some great information and perspective in there. Nader, you and I had discussed that the article in the Washington Post recently, talking about how Congress, there's a bit of a divide between largely the more liberal members of Congress and the more conservative members of Congress as to reopening the economy. And some of the Republicans are looking at passing legislation that would shield businesses from liability over coronavirus as long as they comply with government guidelines. Now, it's going to be really hard for the government to set out guidelines that are going to apply to every case, but effectively what the government is trying to do is say, hey, when you reopen, as long as you comply with this, that's going to effectively be legally meeting the standard of care for your duty to not, unduly spread the coronavirus. And if that could be done, that would certainly take a lot of the uncertainty out and a lot of the guesswork out as to what people should be doing. And then anything above and beyond that someone thinks is appropriate because they're really concerned about spreading the virus is great, but at least there's no concern about liability. As is often said in the legal world, the devil is in the details, and it'll be interesting to see what gets passed and what it says and how clear the guidelines are. But hearing what's been said, the one thing that's crystal clear is that a lot of people are giving a lot of thought to what appropriate steps are, and there's a lot of uncertainty as to whether what they're doing is enough. And it'll be interesting to see whether our fine leadership in Washington provides any assistance in that regard. So keep your eyes out for that.
A little bit more on this this article. It sounds like they're going back and forth in Washington about. Well, it sounded like the Republicans want to shield businesses from liability relating to COVID cases, so that they want businesses to get back. They want the economy to get rolling again. So but and then of course, depending upon if it's they determine it's negligent, then someone could a business could be held liable. But how long will this take for them to? I mean, we saw everyone here has been on the Paycheck Protection Program discussion, and they've been back and forth, and there were lots of holdups on this. But I mean, I guess that's going to help people, make some decisions and have some guidelines to work with. But I mean, I haven't dug into that issue enough necessarily. But Any thoughts on that?
On how quickly we can expect to see some legislation passed? Is that the question? I mean, I expect as quickly as they want the economy to reopen. You know, the whole fear is, you know, there are people that need to work, that need to make a living. And every single person who needs to make a living, to make money, has to ask themselves, all right, I need to get back to work and make money, but what's the point of making money if there's a realistic possibility that I'm going to be sued if coronavirus spreads and then put into bankruptcy or whatever over that. So it's sort of like the chilling effect of the uncertainty is, I think, what, you know, Congress wants to address. You know, I don't take a position on whether or not, you know, the government, you know, the things should reopen. I do note that there was a New York Times article, I think it was yesterday, talking about how, you know, most other countries in Europe and elsewhere, the curve is starting to flatten. You know, in the United States, it's not. I mean, the curve still, you know, like we're not really seeing fewer and fewer cases. Certain locations like New York that have really shut down have seen the number of cases drop significantly. But as a country, you know, they haven't, and they're still spreading. And you start reopening, and there's no reason to believe that that's not going to continue. You know, so these are all things that people have to keep in mind, and, you know, we have to hope that our government acts responsibly. And we all have to act responsibly.
Yeah.
And that's, you know.
Yeah. Juliet, any questions you're seeing on here that you want to?
No, there was a question for Freda. Are you putting in pricing for extra people to be there to do either who's a trained professional? Do you think that will always be an extra line item in the bidding process now?
I haven't so far because we've been doing create in place shoots, or you know, it's just starting to happen. But I suspect that once we have crew, yes, I'm getting all my photographers to find out who to hire, how much they are. I definitely think that we're going to need that assistance.
And do you think that it has to be somebody who's had OSHA training? Do you think it can be? I know we were talking about this a little bit before, but from your perspective.
I think it'll take talking to people like Susanne and other producers to figure that part out. You know, I'm not sure what the tolerance will be of the agencies. And, you know, let's see who comes forth and what kinds of certifications and how much they are. But I definitely, I'm on Susanne, I'm on your page. I mean, let's address all this.
Absolutely. It's a lot.
Yeah.
It's a lot on our shoulders right now.
Right. And a lot of new stuff.
A lot of every day.
And
something new.
And people are crabbing about pricing, and
Right.
you know, they're just going to have to say this is necessary.
Yeah, this is the new standard.
All right.
So Samantha mentioned that talking to a lawyer, actually the lawyer suggested using a waiver that is signed by porn stars because regard to risk of health when on set. I know it sounds crazy, but actually it's not. If people in a porn film are subjecting themselves to an STD, then they sign waivers prior to filming. So I'm wondering, yeah, how that that waiver may be different than what's, you know, used for the Boys and Girls Club. So it's something maybe to compare, you know, and take a look at.
I wouldn't be surprised if it actually doesn't look that different.
Mm-hmm. Oh, really? Interesting. Okay.
I mean, look, like it's basically the same thing. You're recognizing that there are certain diseases out there that are spread from person to person, and that, you know, that's, you take reasonable precautions, but, you know, you can't guarantee anything when you go into this activity knowing that that's a risk, and you assume full responsibility. You know, while again, the you know, the studios would take whatever steps I think are probably they can reasonably take to make sure that they're not bringing people on set that have, you know, that knowingly have those viruses. I mean, I suspect they probably look, I haven't looked at the porn ones, but I suspect they're probably not that different.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Looking good, everybody.
Yeah, I think some of the other things that come up on other discussions were planning ahead for how much time it's going to take going forward to set up a set, to protect a set, to stop during a set, to take down a set, between lighting and everything else and the equipment and for the protection, that the days are going to be longer or there'll be more days to be putting in for. One thing I heard was that people were thinking, well, there might be pricing that you account for, but you'll have saved money because you'll have less people on the shoot perhaps, or less people coming to the shoot. So they'll end up adding that to the cost of having to increase the number of days to go on the shoot. I am curious about if certain states are open, whether or not that means that the liability is different in a state that considers itself open versus doing a shoot in New York, which is still on the stay at home. So Stephen, would there be a difference for a photographer who's in an open state versus a state like New York?
Well, there already is. I mean, as mentioned earlier, negligence liability varies from state to state, and certainly compliance with state mandates that may or may not exist is going to be one of the factors to be looked into. And as I think about it, it'll be interesting to see if our federal government passes a law to protect businesses that open from liability if they, comply with those requirements. Because negligence is a matter for state law, it'll be interesting to see whether or not, like, the interplay between the federal law and state negligence law, could create an area for attorneys to geek out on debates as to the effect of the federal law on state negligence claims. But there's a lot. I mean, there's a lot to figure out. But the short answer to your question is absolutely. There is already a difference from state to state in when and how liability can attach for negligence in situations like this, and certainly how the states have responded and what the states have put in place for stay-at-home orders will play into that.
Yeah, and I think has the associations, the crew, the photographer, the producers, everybody is looking to have the safest situation possible, which is why we're working with everybody on what are these guidelines. Even though there's not a law, obviously nobody wants to see someone get sick. So again, what we're working on is having something that we can share. The idea is to get this out there, to get people thinking about it. What can they do that's reasonable on set? So.
Does anyone have any suggestions of how to stay involved in the conversation? Susanne, I know you mentioned a lot of the producers out there having lots of conversations. Is there any resources you can share about, connecting and being part of that conversation, or is this like a very secret producer kind of?
It's not a secret. It's a Facebook group, and again, I have lots of little things that I'm going to send to Juliet, just with the things that I've seen, about the safety protocols on set, Facebook production. Forums, just so you can see what's going on. It's usually like the latest and greatest of what's been found. Any waivers that I find or anything, if I can, once I receive mine, which I'm hoping to get today, but maybe Stephen can take a look at it. But posting these things that can, again, at least get us started to move safely. But the Facebook page is open.
What is it? Sorry, what is it called?
It is, oh, you put me on the spot.
We'll put it in the link tomorrow.
We'll put it in the link tomorrow, but it's basically just a production resource Facebook page, and I can send it to you. You do have to be invited, I think, on one of them, but then one of them is open, so I'll send it. I'll send it so that everybody can take a peek at it.
Good. Awesome.
I'm trying to think of what else. We
Steve,
just want to move forward.
Any other resources or?
I've been just listening to as much of, the industry webinar stuff as I
Right.
can.
Mhm.
And
So many.
right, there's quite a few. I mean,
Yeah.
APA and, you know, there's several other organizations. So I think every day it's like a whole new, you know, problem or a whole new idea comes up on how to solve this.
Yeah. Right. It's a full-time
So we're
job.
posting on our events page. We have all the APA ones, but also when we hear about other ones, we're trying to post them on our site with links as well. So look for them.
Right. Stephen, any last things you wanted to add? Resources, stay on top of law. Photographers, we really need to, you know, stay on top of it and educate ourselves. You know, sometimes we don't want to look at insurance law, you know, it's like,
No, we'll make sure that I'm happy to work with you guys to make sure that there's some good samples available, you know, for people to kind of take a look at. Anyone who has any questions, don't hesitate to, you know, to reach out to me, to our firm. We've got some really great attorneys here that are happy to help out. And beyond that, just wash your hands.
right. And yeah, with that said, the APA national site has a ton of resources on there, including, Juliet, I believe we posted a lot of the different guidelines we're seeing out there. There are links to at least 3 or 4 different production companies that have put out guidelines, so check those out. Also, just to conclude, wanted to let everyone know there will be a recording of this available on the APA YouTube page, probably late this afternoon. So check that out. And APA is doing a ton of different webinars. There's an open talk on Thursday with Travis Keys, where he interviews usually 2 to 3 photographers on where they're at. APA LA just started one with Andrea Stern, which is really good. And also, Juliet, you said there's a APA Chicago has a webinar today about mental health.
Yep, it'll be starting now. So.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Yeah.
Is that's on the APA page?
Yeah, you can go to the events page on apanational.org or go to APA Chicago and find that, and that's happening right now.
Wow, and this is great. There's also a webinar on motherhood and photography for Mother's Day on Friday. So that's wonderful. All these are on apanational.org. Check it out. So thank you all so much for being part of this. We really appreciate your advice and your help on this. And again, we're going to get through this, and just keep educating yourself and stay healthy, and hope to see you back next week. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for doing
Thanks
it,
so much.
Juliet and Nader. Bye.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Take care.